Hi, this is Swapnil Bharti, and we are here at KubeCon in San Diego. And today we have with us Matt Creager. You are a co-founder of Manifold. First of all, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
I'm curious, can you tell us a bit about what is Manifold all about? What do you guys do?
Manifold is a marketplace for developer tools and services. So if you're adding logging, monitoring, a database to your application, and you want to be able to do that on any cloud, then Manifold might be a good option for you. If you're starting a business in the developer tools ecosystem and you want to be able to distribute your service on any cloud, then Manifold might be a good option for you. And finally, if you're trying to build your own marketplace, so you have your own platform, you have a concentration of developers, and you want to introduce an add-ons experience to it, then we make everything, our billing, provisioning, identity engine, available to platforms so they can build their own marketplaces.
Is your marketplace like a kind of app store kind of thing, or something like Bitnami was trying to do, or is you just offer tools to developers so they can build and package their?
That's a good question. Yeah, so Bitnami is a good example of it's a little bit different, because with Bitnami, you're picking images that you're going to run in your own infrastructure. So that's one type of marketplace or directory. Manifold is more focused on managed services. So this is a database you don't want to run or manage. This is the stuff that you're going to buy, not build. So you might look at services like Mailgun, LogDNA, or Scout for monitoring. Those are the type of services that you'll find on Manifold.
And how can somebody consume it? Like, how do they? It doesn't matter whether they're on multi-cloud or hybrid cloud or on-prem.
So I'd say the most exciting way to use Manifold's services today is to sign up for a platform called Render. Render is a little bit like Heroku if Heroku was built today. It's focused on microservice-based applications, and Manifold powers the add-ons experience on Render. So Render, we're pretty excited about the fact that Render just won TechCrunch Disrupt, so maybe you've heard of them there. But if you want logging or monitoring, you want LogDNA or Scout, then you can add it to your application on Render, and that'll give you a sense of the type of experiences that Manifold powers. And if you're looking at introducing these services to your own platform, then you can check out manifold.co/docs and look through our components and GraphQL APIs.
Perfect. And before we started recording this interview, I discovered that you are passionate about open source, and sustainability of open source. So let's just start with the evolution of open source. If you look at the early days, when Richard Stallman came out with GPL, and if you look at today, the whole ecosystem has changed. Back in those days, people would work in their free time, in the line. Now, almost 80 to Linux Foundation comes out with the reports. 80 to 70% developers are on payrolls. They work for companies.
Yep.
So which also means in a way there is a kind of commercialization of open source is happening, where developers don't have to actually, everybody has to pay bills.
Right.
So I just want to hear your kind of observation about this evolution of open source, where it is becoming, because that is also kind of critical to sustainability.
Maybe I'll talk about the evolution of Manifold, how we started in open source. So we built a secret management tool called Taurus.sh. It was using some fancy elliptical curve cryptography. You can check it out. It's at Taurus.sh. Did I say that? I might have done. The idea was really simple. The challenge of using services in the cloud is bringing all the credentials that you need to connect to those services to your application. And that was the first problem that we jumped in and solved, and we wanted to build an open source tool that did that. And really what we were trying to accomplish is we were trying to understand the types of services that developers were using to build applications. So I think a lot of the times when somebody has a great idea, they look at open source as a place where they can experiment safely with that idea, as a way that they can test the interface for that idea, how developers are going to engage with that service. It's very easy to spin up a package and distribute it to developers, and then get their feedback on it, and maybe even get them to contribute to it. And the bigger the community that you're able to build around your open source project, the more likely it is that you're going to be able to make the leap to a fully fledged product around that open source project. And so I think that's where Manifold started, and the traction that we got with Taurus allowed us to attract a group of developer tools companies and solve that chicken and egg problem that most marketplaces have. So I think every startup, they approach it from a different angle. They're in open source for a different reason. If you're Mailgun, for example, your open source package is a client that developers use to send email through your service. And realistically, they're not using your package unless they sign up for your service. And I think this is just an angle that people who are working in open source projects don't think about enough. They think about, well, how can I license this code? Not how can I run a service that creates more value while solving a similar or adjacent problem.
It's not now or earlier, but it was also like scratch your own itch used to be
Yeah,
case.
yeah.
But the problem with that one was that there was no accountability.
Right.
You would expect that developers say, you just say thank me, thank you, for
Yeah.
doing the job. You cannot expect anything additional from me. But commercialization also changes that. It brings a lot of accountability.
100%.
And then you kind of transform from being a user to a customer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
what will developers do for free? What they enjoy. They'll work on all the problems that excite them. Where do they stop? It's usually the things that make it easy to use the software that they've built. Not always, but documentation. We've heard a lot at the Cloud Native Conf about how important documentation is. We've always heard about how important documentation is. The reason that we don't write documentation is because it's really boring to write documentation. But when our project is generating revenue, when it's putting bread on our table, and our documentation is helping us generate revenue, then we write documentation. So it makes, I think, it's kind of become commercialization has some negative connotations around it, but I think it helps drive higher quality software.
What are the negative connotations?
I think the negative connotations are really that traditionally open source software has been free, and it's good that it's important that core components in developers' workflows remain free. I think like there are things that are just fundamental to how we build software that should be free. But I think if you can build a service around that core functionality that helps somebody derive some business value, then you should be compensated for it.
I mean, open source is more like day one problem. You can take the code, but it's not free because you have to invest in engineering resources. And those are expensive to actually maintain the project.
Right.
And if you're working with upstream, you have to push the changes back. So it is not free. So
it's not free.
Sometimes it may be actually cheaper, to just work with a vendor who does all the work for you.
Yep.
So
and then that takes like there's lots of shapes that takes, that you have a corporate sponsor. So you have a company who is largely dependent on the software that you've built, and they're willing to pay you to maintain it. You've got the kind of community sponsorship model with programs like Patreon, which are also great. I think there's lots of different ways that we can make projects sustainable, but I think one of the most exciting ways is to take a project that started as a hobby and build a startup around it. I think that's kind of the dream, right? And we have to make that easier. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of barriers to entry there that there just shouldn't be. It's you write a great piece of software, and now you want to sell it to people. Well, how do you reach them? How do you price and package it? If it's going to be run somewhere, it's going to live in a container that's running somewhere. Well, how do you provision instances of it? These are all problems that every single person who writes a piece of software has to go and solve for themselves. There isn't great tools. And those are problems that we're trying to solve with Manifold.
Right. One more thing is there, it's not just about support. Sometimes as a customer, when you integrate a project internally, you need a lot of additional features, functionalities. You may want to integrate with your own. It could be, for example, billing system. Want to integrate. So, but those are not the things that the open source project will be interested in.
Right.
The community would not want that. So who's going to maintain that? Nobody. So sometimes it just makes sense to just add it could be proprietary layer also on top of open source project, and sell it to customers.
The truth is, this is already happening. Salvatore created Redis, and Redis Labs runs Redis as a service and hired Salvatore. So this is happening, but I think it's too difficult to win in this game right now. The bar is too high. So if we lower it, maybe we'll see the same explosion. If we can make it as easy to build and sell a service as it currently is to publish a package, maybe we'll see an explosion of innovation the same way that we saw it when NPM introduced package management to the Node ecosystem.
I don't know if you can talk about your customers publicly. if you can you just tell us, give us some example who is using it?
Yeah, so I mean, the most exciting customer that's the most exciting marketplace that we've just recently announced would be Render. And okay. So there's two things with Render. The first one is that the first two services that are available on Render are logging and monitoring. And Render, when they were shortlisted for TechCrunch Disrupt, they had to get really focused on the core value of their platform, and it's an amazing platform. If you haven't tried Render, you absolutely should. And what was I think exciting and interesting about what Manifold brought into the mix was they were able to offer their developers logging and monitoring that developers were already familiar with in LogDNA and Scout. They were able to get it in before TechCrunch disrupts. They launched their own marketplaces, and they made it an integrated part of their own developer workflow. On LogDNA and Scout, these are examples. LogDNA is a great logging platform, and it started off, you talked about like scratching your own itch. Chris and his co-founder, they started a company that was focused on something entirely different. And then they recognized that there wasn't a good logging solution, so they built their own. And they realized that the most important thing that they built in their company was this logging solution, and they turned it into a SaaS product. And then they had to face the challenge of integrating it with all of the different tools and workflows that developers have built. And they're very special guys who managed to jump those hurdles, but maybe those hurdles shouldn't exist. And so the next platform or the next tool that comes along will be able to reach developers on the Render platform without having to build their own billing, provisioning, identity authentication engines. And I think that's kind of what's exciting about Manifold and what we can do for developer tools that want to reach communities like Renders.
And how important is it for you, for all those products or services you offer, to also have a community around them that of course you have customers who use, but do you also want that customers to also come out and contribute if possible? Does it matter?
I think it matters, although I don't know if that's a really interesting question. Yeah, I think we often think about Manifold as a bit, I hope this is the right word, bipartisan. It's like we shouldn't judge necessarily the developer tools in a marketplace. We should leave that to people like Anurag, who are building communities around Render. He knows what the right tools are for his community, and we want to make it easy for those tools to reach Anurag so that he can make an informed choice, and make it easy for Anurag to launch those tools in his community. So I think it is important, but it isn't a choice that we should make. We want to do, again, the same thing for services that package managers did for packages. Just make it really easy to get them out there into the world, to get them in the hands of developers in the workflows that they use every single day, and let developers choose the best tools. Let the best tools win.
So one of the problem that is happening that almost everybody is using open source, but they don't know how open source works.
Right. Okay.
So even they use a lot of open source, but their own developers work as proprietary companies.
Yeah.
So how important it is, for those to actually, when they do see a change, go and make a commit.
Yeah. I see what you're asking. So there's a lot of people that are using technology for free that they complain about and don't contribute to.
Not even free, even paying also.
Oh, paid.
Yeah, the customers also, because internally when the developer come across a bug, so.
Yeah, so I think it depends on the type of service they're using. Because we mentioned LogDNA and Scout. Now, Scout has lots of open source libraries, but Scout has proprietary dashboards and things too. So there's some areas that you can contribute to and some areas that you can't. And I think if there is a feature that you need, that you don't expect the rest of the community to need, then you should probably contribute it. If there's a feature that you need that you can't contribute and you're paying, well, now you have the right to ask because you're a paying customer, and you can earn a spot on their roadmap. So I think it really depends on the nature of the service. And then you've got platforms like, or tools like Postgres, for example. There's lots of people that JawsDB has a great managed Postgres product that's available on Manifold. And you can contribute to Postgres. And you should contribute to Postgres because Postgres is a very important tool in the developer ecosystem. And I think a lot of the people that can't contribute to Postgres, they don't have expertise in the underlying Postgres technology. Those are the people that should purchase a Postgres database from somebody like JawsDB who is going to contribute to it because they do understand it. Okay.
As I said, a lot of companies are already using open source, but they don't, understand. So my question to you is that, is there a problem today where companies are using open source, but they don't know how open source works? If it is the problem, what would be the solution?
I think that problem definitely exists, and I think actually the solution might not be to get out into the world and contribute to existing products, at least not in every case. I think if a developer is passionate about a product or a project, then they're going to find a way to contribute to it. I think what companies can do is they can look at the technology that they maintain internally, all of the stuff that makes up whatever service they're offering that isn't critical or core to the value, the business value that they create, and open source it all. Like that is, those projects are going to be maintained. They're going to be maintained by those organizations, and they should make them available to the open source community. That's what it means to be a good member of the open source community, is taking the stuff that isn't business critical and letting other people use it. And maybe you'll have a slumber hit on your hand. This is like, I think there's a lot of companies that have great internal technologies that they could make available externally, and they'd find that those projects got traction, those projects move forward faster than they'd ever be able to drive them forward themselves. And if they need to maintain some level of control, well, there's models for doing that successfully in the open source community too.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt, so much for coming here and talking about open source, because it's critical, to have these discussions around open source. We are all using open source, but we actually forgot the roots of it and how it actually works. So once again, thank you.
Thanks for having me.